Hey, everybody. It's been a while and it's really great to be back. I noticed when I was logging on that this is episode number 100, which is a really cool milestone. I'm going to call this episode The End of Career and Nations. And the reason is because I think the signs right now, with all of the institutional problems that we're having with banks and schools and um, military, police, pharmaceutical companies, pretty much any single institution that you could think of, I think it suggests that centralization of power, of influence, of resources is no longer as effective as it once was during the industrial period, where you needed nations and large militaries and massive amounts of resources to fund these massive economies and markets and effectively uh, use people as cogs in a giant machine, either as soldiers or laborers. We're moving into a period where we now have information that dismantles and breaks the foundation of what we have grown up in, what our parents have grown up in, what our grandparents have grown up in. And this has existed for about 500 years, so it goes back for a while. But before that, it was the church, and the church was the defining institution in people's lives, and it became hugely corrupt. It had all of these bureaucracies and rules, and it became very difficult to live a pious life of just trying to live, I guess, as Jesus would have lived, to just be a good Christian at the time, right? There were all of these rules. The church was selling indulgences, which were basically permission to sin to whoever would pay money for it. And eventually the church became so overburdened and so corrupt, and people resented all the church officials, the cardinals and the bishops and the priests so much that the church just collapsed. And of course there's a lag, but then really nation states filled that gap. The idea of countries filled that void, that power vacuum. And that's where we are today. And if all of that didn't sound familiar, what I was mentioning before, all the problems with the church, that's what's going on with politics right now. And politicians have taken the place of priests, and they basically spout charismatic lies that people buy into. People believe with full faith that their politician is going to be the one to fix it all, and their politician is going to create some sort of, I don't know, utopian heaven on earth or whatnot. But it's not the case. It's really falling apart, and we're seeing the corruption and the careerism and the self-preservation really behind a lot of the promises, the empty promises. And so the other half of the title is about career. I do think that career is another form of centralization, just like nation states are, where your sole source of income is behind a single profession or job that you're supposed to have your entire life, which was really encouraged by the circumstances that existed in the industrial era. It's not really inherent to anything human. It doesn't even go back much further than, our lifetimes. This idea of you work at like a corporation and you climb a ladder, it's not even really that possible anymore. Once again, technology has undermined it, and information has undermined it, and these careers are disaggregating into basically tasks. And if people have, you have a bundle of skills within yourself, some are developed, some are less developed, but you can work on them. And moving forward, people are going to be less tied to careers. People are going to be less tied to a single thing, and therefore less fearful, and therefore able to speak more openly, and to be able to call out corruptions, to be able to call out things. Because right now, how it exists, people see that stuff isn't working. They might be part of a bureaucracy or a corporation. They might even imagine themselves being a whistleblower of some kind. And I don't want to, it does take courage to be that person that we all hope that we would be, the person to run into a burning building, the person who would save Anne Frank and her family, the person who would call out corruption. But let's face it, that there are real world circumstances where if you're supporting an entire family and they rely on you to support them, you can't be taking that risk per se. Same thing if you have serious health issues and you're relying on your one source of income for your benefits package. So moving forward, as concentrated sources of wealth, of income, and of sovereignty. Sovereignty being legitimacy. So like a nation deriving its power from basically having a monopoly on force, having a monopoly on the military and the police, and basically being able to uh, force you to do force you to comply at the threat of a gun or the implication of a gun. That's going to start to evaporate, and we're seeing the institutions fall apart right now. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. In the short term, it's going to be painful, but I'm very optimistic that this is a metamorphosis. I'm not an end times fire and brimstone preacher, but I want people to be aware of just how broken things are. I'm not trying to get people purely just depressed and anxious and um, doubting the world and nihilistic and all these things. I'm trying to say there's another idea, a new narrative that we need to be moving into and considering. It's one that I have called technological humanism, and I'm actually trying to design the blueprint for it right now. I have drafted up the different concepts that are going into it and how they relate to each other. Typical of this idea, because it's based on decentralization and networks and technology and information, and empowerment of the individual, but not just rugged individualism, so to speak, but social individualism, where um, we help each other and collaborate with each other and come up with new innovative ideas and open source them and uh, create truly meaningful, purposeful projects and take part in numerous different things. Um, but all of that needs to be brought forth by recognizing what's going on and talking about it and developing it. So I am coming up with a blueprint for it, and I'm going to present that eventually. But right now, admittedly, I apologize. It seems like I'm just basically rattling off all of the corruptions and issues with the world. And there are people who are probably listening or seeing the things that I'm posting and saying, well, okay, like, great. So you're pointing out all this stuff. What would you do about it? Or what would you do differently? And it's almost like when somebody is digging a hole in the sand at the beach, trying to dig a big hole and it keeps caving in. And if I were to come over and criticize, I get being upset about that. Say, okay, well, if you're so great, what would you do? It's, well, maybe I wouldn't dig a hole in the sand. Maybe I wouldn't dig a hole at all. Maybe we should do something else entirely. So it's sort of thinking outside of the parameters, the narrow parameters of we have to continue to exist with the government and the national flag and um, national divisions and careers and everything that defined what came before us, but doesn't that no longer defines us or that defines our circumstances. It's evolution, not just through the generations, but within a generation now. We are uh, not just millennials, but other people who want to partake in this right now. We are another version of the greatest generation because we're being tapped on the shoulder right now. And we have the opportunity to do something about this, to develop, to create, to be empathetic, to solve problems, to work our way out of this, to make strong families and strong communities. And I'm not running for political office right now. Um, but we really need to think outside the box. And that's it. I'm done with my little spiel, but expect to hear more about this soon. Once again, this is the 100th episode, and I'm very glad to be back. And I look forward to seeing what I can do with the Man vs. Mob podcast in 2021. I know that you've been hearing me do a lot of monologues recently, and I realize that I want to do less of them. I've
Mhm.
really been doing them just to get some important ideas out, but I want to have more conversations. I want to bring more guests on, focus on that. I want to maybe do some live streams. I want to broaden this. I want to broaden the conversation. I want to create a new version of the 95 Theses, what Martin Luther put on the door of the church back when he was criticizing and he started the Protestant Reformation. Like, we need to start a reformation. We need to have a new enlightenment, a new renaissance, a new, but it's not necessarily going to be a recreation or a new version of what was. It's going to be some things, a lot of things that we have never seen before, and we need to imagine them and bring them forth. I know I'm getting heavy here, and this is really at the end, but there's a series called Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson narrating, and if you don't know what the cosmos is, it's basically the entire universe, all the stars, the planets, everything within it, antimatter, crazy particles that I couldn't remember if I tried. We are the only thing in the cosmos that appears to have consciousness, subjective experience that can create, that can tell stories and narratives and be crazy inventive. So it's up to us to basically pick up the ball and be the conscious cosmos because that's what we are. Um, so with that, I would like to say good night and see you next time.